I guess our levels are okay. We're going to get started now. There'll probably be a few people walking in every now and then. But I'd like to start by introducing the panel. This is Creating the Perfect Character. And we'll start with Jason. Jason is the president and co-founder of Naughty Dog. He and his partner, Andy Gavin, have been developing games since 1985. And they created Crash Bandicoot, the Crash Bandicoot series, which is one of the most enduring and successful franchises of all time. Actually, Crash Bandicoot 2, Wrath of Cortex, or Cortex Strikes Back, Crash Bandicoot Warped, CTR Crash Team Racing, together sold over 20 million units worldwide. And Crash 3 Warped has the unique distinction of being the only foreign title that has sold over 1 million copies in Japan, which is quite a feat. This past Christmas, Jason and his team released Jak and Daxter, which was a groundbreaking title on the PlayStation 2. It received excellent critical acclaim and has sold extremely well for Sony, both here and in all territories worldwide. Jason and his team are well known for creating enduring characters, and it's a pleasure to have him here with us. Toshihiro Nagoshi is the president of Amusement Vision. He began working at Sega Enterprises in 1989 and was promoted to vice chief of Sega Software Division, Software Development Team, AM2, in 1995. He's a creator of many hit titles that we all know: Daytona USA, Virtua Striker, Spike Out, Virtua NBA, and many other titles. Recently, in 2000, Nagoshi-san became president of Sega Software Development Team, Amusement Vision. His most recent project, Super Monkey Ball, combined a unique approach to character creation and action-oriented mini-games to produce one of the most amusing and entertaining games out on the GameCube. It is one of Sega's first release on the GameCube, and featured four characters, Mimi, Gon, and Baby. For those of you who played it, you know it's an extremely fun game. This year, he is exhibiting his newest creation, Super Monkey Ball 2, at the Sega booth. You guys should go check it out. It's a beautiful game. And then sitting next to me is Lorne Lanning, who is the president and co-founder of Oddworld Inhabitants. Lorne founded Oddworld with his partner, Sherry McKenna, in 1994. He is a 15-year veteran of the computer graphics and digital media field. And when he founded it, his vision was to combine compelling gameplay with deep storytelling and unique characters. And I think that any of you who went to the first E3 where Lorne unveiled Oddworld, it was an amazing sight. Characters that really had never graced the screens of video games before. I remember for me it was a particularly enchanting moment walking into their first display. 3 games have comprised the Oddworld universe: Abe's Odyssey, Abe's Exodus, and this year Munch's Odyssey, which was released on the Xbox and has become one of the most successful Xbox titles this year. Munch was also a very interesting and compelling design. Lorne, I think, threw out the character design rulebook on that one, but has really expanded the genre by taking risks in the character action category. So thank you all for being here. Thank you. And my name's Ted Price. I'm the president and founder of Insomniac Games. We created the Spyro series on PlayStation 1. And this year we are releasing Ratchet & Clank, which is a character action game on the PlayStation 2 on exhibit in the Sony booth. So today what we want to do is have more of a conversational format where we are discussing various topics surrounding creating characters, what is a perfect character, how does one create them, and where character creation is going in this industry. And I want to start out with a couple general questions for the panel. First of all, for you guys, are there any characteristics that you find consistently exhibited by successful game characters?
Well, actually, I would say that Lorne's games, which have been very successful, prove that you can break all of the rules. But there are certainly, I would say, things that you can't get away with. I don't, in memory, know of a character that's been extremely successful over a long period of time that's had terrible animation compared to the contemporary games of its time. So, for example, the first Donkey Kong game, the animation was not wonderful, but for its time, it was good, and that character became endearing. You can't have bad animation. You can't have, these days, really bad voiceover and have a successful character. So it's more not making the mistakes than it is picking certain attributes that have to be there. I don't know if I'm correct, right, that we have a main character in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And he's not pretty, he's not furry, he's not cute. So all of the rules that you would think are there are completely broken by Lorne, but successfully. So I think it's more what to avoid. Avoid doing things that are going to kill the character rather than specific things you have to do. Otherwise, your character won't succeed. I think that'd be a better way of looking at it.
I think one of the... Can you hear me? Is that coming through?
Yeah. Move it up a little bit.
And I showed up early enough. Okay. I think one of the key things also that really distinguishes the characters that have success is that the mechanics that the characters perform are integral to the type of character that it is. So let's say from a superficial perspective, as a witness, the Sonic character, the spinning of the Sonic character was critical in the way that he behaved, but at the same time, it was integral into the design. So the two weren't really that separated. Crash had a basic, like a tornado-like move, and yet the shape of the character was very much in that same emulated pattern. Munch, our characters, I think we've been maybe crazy enough to focus on designing ugly characters, which is... When people say, "Oh, they're so cute," we're like, "Really?" But part of that reasoning is that whatever they do should be integral to the design. And like in Munch, we only got about 50% of what that character was supposed to be, because he was supposed to have an alter ego, much like a Hulk. And you'd slap him around, and he'd get mad, and then he'd turn into that, and then you could use that, but it never manifests in the actual game engine. So we were trying to create a character that everything about its physical appearance related completely to the way that it actually played, and then also that the story of it, of what this thing was going through, related to the actions of the mechanics. And I think the wider separation that we see in characters where it doesn't feel as though anything about the character, outside of the qualities of animations, the voices and things, but where outside of the character design itself, there's nothing that really seems to be tying that to the world it's taking place in its actions, is something that I see often, but I don't see it hit the charts with the gamers.
Nagoshi-san, would you have something?
言うことはなくなっちゃったんですけど。
You guys said it all.
It's too easy.
Well, certainly, I think we'll come back to actually design in Japan very soon when we'll talk about characters that have been uniquely successful in Japan. But is there anything right now that worldwide, have you seen any characteristics that for you have particularly been compelling about characters that have succeeded?
僕はとにかく、さっきのテーマにも触れるんですけど、まずは最終的に面白いと言われなきゃいけないわけで、僕もデザイナーだから見かけって見た目というのはまずすごい気にはするんですよ。
It's also the relative to that the previous subject. First of all, the character has to be interesting. Of course, I am a designer, so appearance is very important.
でも、結局見かけで、売れたゲームってのはないってことにしばらくすると働き出して気づいた日があるんですね。
So one day I realized that none of the character has been successful because of the appearance alone.
Okay.
で結局なんて言うんだろう、有名なキャラクターマリオであったりフォニックみんな知ってるんですけど、冷静に考えてみたらマリオは単なるヒゲのおじさんだし、フォニックは単なる昔はあれネズミだと言ってくれる人は誰もいなかったし、青い猫だと言ってたし、要するにルックスではなくて結局はインタラクションの中で我々がやってそのタッチが面白ければ 結果的にいいキャラクターだって言ってくれるわけで、ゲームの中でその先ほど機能機構という話が出ましたけど、そこにマッチしてるかどうかがもう全てだと僕も思います。そういう意味で言うと、売れたゲームのキャラクターはイコール基本的にはいいキャラクターであるっていうことを言っても問題はないんじゃないでしょうか。
For example, when you think about the Mario or Sonic, it's very simple characters. Mario is just like the old guy with the mustache. And then Sonic, nobody realized it's actually a mouse. Everybody said it's a blue cat. So the audience have to find it very interesting during the course of interaction. So in a way, I can really say the good character is always incorporated with the good games.
Maybe I can add something to what Lorne said, because I think that's interesting. When we designed Jak and Daxter, we didn't start with a character and then say, okay, what kind of game is he going to be in? We started with a wide open slate and created what we call Boxman. And Boxman is a character that's made of cubes. Could be anything in the end. And then we say, well, here's what we want to do in the game. We want to have the character run through the environment. So two-legged, we're going to go with two-legged. It's easier than four-legged because four-legged's hard to get it to turn and look like it's connecting with its universe. We're going to make it this tall because that makes sense for the kind of jump it's going to be doing. When it's going to attack, how does the attack work with the enemies so that you don't have to directionally attack? Well, we're going to do a 360 attack, and well, let's make it a kick. Well, his foot's too small. You can't see the foot. Make the foot bigger. And eventually we get this, what we call Boxman, to be the right shape, size, and functionality and animation of the character we're doing. And then we've effectively created a gameplay with no character. And then we say, okay, what would fill this out? And before we just go off and decide randomly to do something, we say, what does the market look for this year? And we decided with Jak and Daxter that we wanted to move a little bit older than fuzzy characters. That was just our personal opinion. So we made him more humanoid. And we started to fill out Boxman into Jak. And that took about 4 months. And during that process, again, we were kind of going back and forth with the gameplay, and the designers would say, that character doesn't look like he can do what we need him to do, and we would change it for the game. I think if you look around the show floor, you might see some titles where they said, we need a fuzzy mascot character. They went out and they designed one. And in fact, often you see in marketing materials, first there's an image of the characters, but they don't show gameplay yet. And often that's because there is no gameplay. There's just an idea of a character look. And then you have to design the game around the character. And because we're game makers, I think that's the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So I think Lorne's right that you have to create a character that fits what he's doing, not fit a game to a character design.
And I also think that that's an additional compounding difficulty on that is the state of the industry, in that the way Jason's describing Boxman is the way I've always wanted to build a game character, but have never been able to, because it's hard to sell Boxman. You know, the publishers are going, wait a minute, how many millions am I putting into this, and what is the guy going to look like, and how do I know that this age group and that demographic and women are going to like that too? So I think that is the ideal way to really design the characters, is around those actions without you could have a story for what that character's about. You could have a character development about what his heart and soul is about and his dilemmas are about. But what he physically looks like, our place has been that we've always had to show our characters beforehand, before they played, because that's how we get our games funded. And people go, wait a minute, that's weird. And we go, yeah, but this cool weird stuff is what's going to help you cut through. You know, it's not going to be the fuzzy mascot that is going to be, 25 of them sitting next to it on the show floor. It's going to be unique. And that helps get the money, but at the same time, it helps pin down your abilities for what then takes place in the game. So the ideal way would be pure mechanics first, which is actually how I heard Sonic was built, that Sonic didn't have the character design until the very end. But as we look towards the future, I think we're looking at a different type of design paradigm too, as games get more realistic and the characters rely less on twitch and more on a deeper rounded sensibilities as to what they're about in many layers beyond just what they're doing as actions.
I can tell you the way we got away with it, and we're a very lucky company in that we had come off the successes of Crash. And we basically funded all the Crash games besides Crash 1 for the first few months until we had decided what we were doing. We funded it out of our own pockets, Naughty Dog expense. And the first $3 million worth of funding on Jak and Daxter was out of my pocket and my partner's pocket. So we did what we wanted to do on the theory that we would make a good game, somebody would want to publish it, and we would make all that money back. But we wanted to do the exploration without having to try to sell it. We also had a relationship with a publisher that trusted us, and an incredibly good publisher that we felt we would eventually be working with. Though there was at that time no contract. We were self-funding. So we thought that we had the ability to go off and experiment in the direction we thought we needed to, which was Boxman first.
Well, that's an interesting topic, and that's the process that you guys use to create your characters. Lorne, you and Jason have talked a little bit about how you started creating your characters. You went to the prototype, you guys kind of prototyped it, you come up with a story, you figure out what character is going to work with your game design. Nagoshi-san, when you were designing the characters for Super Monkey Ball and Super Monkey Ball 2, what was the process that you and your team used to come up with those characters?
ですね、最初はもう実は、これ言うとちょっと変ですけど、キャラクターゲームではなかったんですよね。ボールを転がすだけのゲームだったから、ファルは最初はいなかったんです。
It might sound a little bit weird, but in the beginning, we didn't plan to use a character. That the game was planned to have only a ball. The ball rolls around.
でもっとソリッドでクールな画面だったんですよね。
So that the screen was more solid and very cool screen originally.
やっぱりアクション。
But we thought maybe the audience will be very bored with the game.
で、一番の問題は、ボールがどれぐらい進んで今どっちに動こうとしているのかっていうのが、そのボールのダイレクションが分かりづらかったっていう問題がすぐあったんですよ、そのゲームの場合。
But the biggest problem was that it was very difficult to find out the orientation of the ball, the direction of the ball. That was the biggest problem of the game.
それを、なんとか解消する方法の中で、キャラクターを入れて、そのキャラクターが動くこととボールが進むことっていうのをマッチさせてプレイヤーに理解してもらおうという手段を取ることにしたんです。
So in order to address the problem, that we created the character. So the movement of character can direct the direction of the ball.
ボールのスピードが速くなってボールのなんていうの、摩擦の火花が散ったりすることも大切だけど、やっぱりその中の猿が死ぬほど一生懸命に走る方が、ボールがすごい勢いで走っていること、進んでいることにやっぱり一番伝わりやすいんですよね。
Maybe it was very much easier to express the speed of the ball, to see that the monkey working so hard to move the ball, rather than showing like a fires because of the friction.
細かいことを言えばそれで、ボールの中に入っているからすごくキャラクターが小さいので、顔が目立つようになフォルムであったりとか、最初のバージョンは地面がグリーンが多かったんで、それと同調しない色を選んで T シャツをオレンジにしたりとか、そういった基本的なことはもちろんやりましたけど。
So as a detail, because the monkey is in the ball, the character is very small, so we had to enlarge the face so the audience can see it. And also the initial screen has a lot of green. The ground was green, so we had to make the T-shirts orange.
そのボールだからちょっと特殊ですよね。ボールのコンディションを、キャラクターを通じて見せるっていう意味では、ちょっとまた同じキャラクターの動作を作るっていう作業の中でも少し特別なゲームだったのかもしれません。
So this the game is in a way a little bit exceptional in terms of creating a character, because we had to address the issue to show the direction of the ball. That was the kind of motivation of creating a character.
although he may have stumbled upon it, it's very similar to what we ended up doing. It's ball man instead of box man. He started with the gameplay of the ball and then figured out characters that fit with what he had, a good game. Whatever would fit. He couldn't do certain things. Couldn't have giant characters because they had to fit in a ball. Couldn't have really strong characters because they had to look like they were, being moved by the ball or that the ball was around them and they couldn't bust out of it or whatever. So he was restricted by the gameplay. But the gameplay is what makes a game good.
Yeah.
So that's the right direction to start with.
Well, so when you guys have the idea for the gameplay, what is the actual process? Do you have a team of artists who are drawing all day long, coming up with prototypes or ideas that would fit the gameplay idea, or do you have one person doing it? How does that process work for each of you?
Well, I think there's a precursor to that to begin with, which is today's game budgets for a AAA title. When you said $5 million 4 years ago, people were going, "Oh my God, that's a game." And today, you'd say $10 to $15 million, and the publisher goes, "Yeah, that's a AAA title. That's what we're going to have to pay." But what they're also looking at that price range is they're going, "What's my ancillary licensing opportunities? Do I get a motion picture out of this? Do I get a TV show out of this? Am I going to be able to have a character that helps sell and that helps sell in different media platforms that I might make some of my returns on beyond just the game sales?" Which is also, I think, a part of character design today for games because of these escalating budgets. And in the end, I don't know if any of you saw DICE. We're at DICE with David. Jason gave a talk on the changing market and how the market perceptions can change very rapidly and the impact that has on the finances, the sales, the cost of the games, et cetera. But that being said, in the characters that we're designing, the new characters, we have a couple of production design people that are coming up with what they feel, what together we feel is representing the aesthetics of what we want. And then we have some low-res versions of that are malleable. They're more than a box, but they're adjustable, so that when we get them into the game engine, we're finding that it doesn't do this well because the legs are shaped this way, or it doesn't do that well. So let's be able to play with the dimensions and the shape of that character while leaving it in somewhat of the form of this higher concept, intellectual property model of a hero type of character. But allow like Jason was saying, but the foot needs to be bigger. Allow that to take place and not have locked down. And as in games like ours, we're going, the movies that we're making, the pre-rendered movies that integrate with the gameplay, we want those two to look really as close as possible, syncing to one another. But at the same time, if we're going to build a good character for a pre-rendered movie, that means a few months of building that character in computer graphics, lighting, textures, all those things. And you don't want to get that far down the road before you've gone through the malleable process where you can still sculpt him a bit to his dimensions to make sure that he's actually playing on the playing field the way that you want him to be.
So your character's evolved.
So we have an engineer, a production designer, and a real-time animator working, doing iterations and then getting feedback with one another. And then myself being the ultimate pain in the ass, I guess, to them, But just trying to get closer and closer to something that is going to work, and yet is going to work aesthetically on a high detail level, and is going to work at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second in the action realm, and still know that this character that I'm seeing here is that character there. He feels alive, he feels lifelike, and he has that stuff. But the more of that experimentation we can have along the way, the better it's going to be.
Can I interrupt? Are you guys hearing us okay up there in the back? I see a lot of people nodding heads. Okay, good. Would any of you like to talk specifically about your character design process, the actual taking it from art to the...
When we felt we were comfortable with the way that Boxman moved, the next stage was to move into designing the character. And there are a lot of forces that pull on the character. You've got gameplay, which has already been established. You have art. It can't be an ugly character. Not that it can't be ugly, but it can't be ugly in a way that's not going to be favorable. It can't be a character that's weird shaped in a way that's disgusting and things like that. So it has to fit the gameplay, but it also has to be a good looking character. On top of that, we added on a lot of additional requirements for the character. It was my decision, and I'm not sure this was a good one, that the character should not speak much, because we thought that the player would be the character if they didn't have the character speak, and if the character spoke and they thought it wasn't funny, or they thought it wasn't them, that they would be distanced from the characters. And that was my reasoning for keeping Crash quiet, and I thought that we could get away with it with Jack. I think he needs some speech. He didn't have it at all. But if a character cracks a joke and you don't like that joke, you're not the character anymore, you're playing the character. And I really wanted to avoid that. So that's why Jack didn't speak. At the same time, we knew this generation, we had these capabilities to do full facial animation, dialogue that was compelling as opposed to the dialogue we've had in the past, to have characters with personality. And we wanted to do both. So Daxter was, in effect, Jack's personality. Daxter was the half of Jack that I didn't want to put on Jack, and I didn't want to risk having Jack distance himself from people. So Daxter ended up with all of that personality, and Daxter ended up winning this year at the Game Developer Conference the Character of the Year in the Game Developer Choice Awards, which is interesting because he's not actually a playable character, but he's still got Character of the Year. He's half of Jack. So we had these restrictions, that there had to be a sidekick. The sidekick wasn't controllable, so he had to get on Jack's shoulder or do something else that made him part of the gameplay we had already created. We have all these rules and restrictions that we had to live under. And then Bob Raffi, who's our senior artist, along with other Naughty Dogs who want to throw in sketches, start drawing. We also had Charles Zembalis, who's a cartoon designer in Hollywood. He does more TV and movie kind of cartoon design, sending us sketches, reviewing our sketches, because there's 50, 100 years, somewhere in there, of cartoon knowledge in Hollywood. If you look back 15 years in our industry, you're dealing with Pac-Man, or 20 years is Pac-Man. So we don't have the character design knowledge in this industry yet. So we went outside, and we did the same with Crash. Charles worked with us on Crash too. Bring him in, have him look at the character. And then month after month, we breed sketches, like the ears there, like the nose there, like the way the foot looks there. Put those characters together and slowly iterate down until we have something we like. Then we put it up in front of people, and we say, what do you think of this character? Just gut reaction. You don't know anything about the gameplay. You don't even know it's a game. What do you think of this character? He's ugly. We don't like him. Throw it out, start over, iterate down again. And that's why it takes 4 months to do it, because you're continually throwing things out, continually changing, trying to fit all of your different requirements into a character. And I'm very, very happy that in the end we ended up with a character that got voted new character of the year. Although I think that we did make mistakes, and Jack should probably have spoken because he ended up a little flat as his half of the character.
いや、もう皆さんすごい立派なプロセスで、びっくりしてます。
Impressed by you guys. It's really kind of a very good process, I think.
僕はもう、こういう人は一人ぐらいいてもいいと思うんだけど、決めるときは1日ぐらいでもすぐにキャラクター決めちゃうし、どうせ後で変わるもんだから。
Sound effects for the next game.
だからどうせモディファイしなきゃいけないもんだから結構簡単に決めて、それで変わるときは変わるしっていうふうに、ゲームの事情や都合が変わる以上キャラクターは当然変わっていくもんだから、あんまりそのマーケティングとかいうことっていうのはもう最終的にまた当然、日本のやり方なのかもしれないけど、お金の取り方とかも、方針的にも変わっていくところもあるんで、フレキシビリティが高い状況だけ残っていて、でそのプロセス自体は結構割と気楽にやってる方なんで、今日うちのスタッフが何人か来てますけど、うちのやり方っていうのはすごいいい加減なんだなって今日はすごい勉強になってると思ってます。
So probably I'm very unusual. Because when I decide something, sometimes I decide a character in one day. And when it's always true that I have to change the character. I keep changing until the end of the project. because that the game will evolve during the project. So I always think that the character is going to be changed. So I always have a room of a flexibility with the character. And regarding marketing, in the beginning, I don't really worry about the marketing so much. Marketing also will evolve during the course of a project. So I don't know, but maybe this is Japan has a very unique way of the proceeding of the project. Marketing might be a different, the method of marketing might be different from other countries. So I have my staff member in the audience today, and then they might be thinking that, our company is not really so rigid. Our way is really free. So I'm sure that they are learning a lot of things today.
I think also a possible cultural difference is that we live in a very, in the West, we live in a very disposable culture, which basically means it doesn't matter how many hit games you made before. If this one's not cutting it, you're yesterday's lunch. And no one really, so everything that you suggest and everything that you might pitch, you're going to be looked at by someone in the marketing department who's like, I'm not sure, you missed the ball. I can't trust your opinion anymore. And they might not understand any of the reasons for that. And I think in the East, there's when someone establishes themselves as a great designer, there is. I haven't had to get games funded in the East, but it appears as though there is a different level of respect and a different level of status that's attained with those types of breakthrough hits, and a different degree of trust that's nurtured through a different type of development cycle than we see here in the United States too. And I think that may help some of the development that takes place in the East, and it can hurt a lot of the development that takes place in the West. It's kind of like the music business, If there's a hit one year and it goes through the roof, and then the next year no one cares about that person anymore.
I'd actually like to touch on marketing because I didn't add that as one of the thousands of constraints we have on character development. I've seen over the years a lot of developers that are in a very adversarial relationship with marketing departments. They say things like, marketing screwed up the last game, marketing this, marketing that. Marketing is a tool. If marketing is not on the side of your game will not succeed. So marketing is extremely important. From day one, when we start making games, Sony has been our publisher now for years. And I have, every other month, we have a meeting with Sony Computer Entertainment America, Sony Computer Entertainment Japan, Sony Computer Entertainment Europe. Everyone sends ambassadors, in effect, to see what we're doing. And before we implement things, or if after we implement things we never have permanent stuff until it's approved, we ask them, what do you think of this new character? Will it work in Japan? Will it work in Europe? The European Sony division sells to 80 territories now. As diverse as Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Australia, France, Germany, with different rules and regulations on what you can release. So we ask every one of them every 2 months, is this okay for your market? And if Japan doesn't like it, then it has to change somehow, but it has to change in a way that Europe will still like it, or America will still like it. Or you have to make some sort of divergent code where in Japan it's different than it is in the United States. And that is an integral part of our design process. We do not fight marketing, we try to inspire marketing. If marketing comes in, looks at characters and says, we're not terribly interested in it, but it's okay, I don't see any problems with it, you're not going to get inspired marketing people. And if you don't have inspired marketing people, you won't have a hit. You have to have a character that inspires the marketing groups. And I would highly advise you to bring the marketing groups in as early as possible and have them looking at it. And I would say it doesn't contradict what I said about self-funding. We had a publisher we were very sure we were going to go with in Sony, so they sent their marketing people in to look at a character that they weren't sure was going to be theirs. It worked very well for us. And eventually when we did, Naughty Dog sold itself to Sony Computer Entertainment last year, we became one big machine. Marketing department, development, working together in a non-adversarial way. And I think that's a big key to our success. No matter how cool your character is, if it's not advertised, if it's not put on shelves, it's not going to sell. That's the bottom line. Absolutely the bottom line.
You guys, I mean, with the marketing and the demands of probably the publisher on the production side, you have a lot of forces really grinding on the designers, the people who are making the games, probably less so in Japan. But how do you keep your guys motivated? You have somebody who's doing hundreds of drawings every day. You guys may be coming by and saying, no, I don't like that, or let's change this. How do you keep those guys inspired to come up with what is going to be the next big hit?
I redefine art for everybody that works at Naughty Dog. Anyone that stands up and says, my job is to be an artist, and you're restricting my art by making me listen to marketing people or follow design based on the gameplay or any of the other things that I'm asking them to do, I say, that's a different type of art. And if you want to do that type of art, I'm fine with it, but you're not going to work at a company that pays you like Naughty Dog pays you, and you're not going to have sales like Naughty Dog obtains. So go do your art somewhere else. In our company, art is selling games to the widest population, making the widest population people happy. We're pop artists. We're not artists for the sake of art. We're artists in the fact that we try to do the best we can to make the widest audience enjoy what we do. And if you can't be that type of artist, if you have to do art for your own sake, then you can't work at Naughty Dog. And you have to aspire to that type of art, the art of the population, the pop art. You have to aspire to that type of art.
So you pick the right guys.
You pick the right guys, and if you don't find the right guys, you let them go find a place where they can do art for art's sake. They have to, at Naughty Dog, get into the mentality that what they are doing is trying to create a successful character. And when the character is successful, you smile and you say, I have succeeded. You don't put it on your own wall at home and say, I have created art. And everyone else looks at it and goes, ugh, that's not art to me. Art to me is when everybody else tells you it's good, not when you tell yourself it's good. And that needs to be, in my company, a foundation of the way that you act, basically.
Okay. Lorne, how would you address that?
At our company, I think we're two different schizophrenic hats. You know, one is like, I promise the artists that it's not going to be easy, because I'm going to push them, but I'm going to push them so hard in ways that at the end of the day, what they come up with is going to be what they want to show their mom. You know, and I don't mean that they're young. I mean that that's what they're going to be the most proud of. And in my experience in commercial art in the various mediums, whether it's film, television, illustration, or theme parks or video games, the spirit of the artist is the same. They want to do great work and they want to be proud of that work. And then the more meaning that work can have, then usually the more that they connect with it. So that's the one side. On the one side, I feel like my job is kind of being a muse, you know, really trying to inspire them. On the other side, I'm kind of like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, you know, where I'm like, and no one's going to buy it, you know. So this is about finding the synergy of where art meets commerce, and like what Jace is saying, there's so much truth in that. What I've been after personally is that I feel that the few things in any entertainment media's history that really breaks through is when it really captures the spirit of the artist and at the same time captures the hearts of the masses. You know? And if that can happen, then you can really punch it over the top. And that's where we see redefining films. We see Citizen Kane. We see, a lot of different movies through history, Star Wars, Matrix. But that synergy is an extremely difficult dance. And to the degrees that we've really been successful at what I'm after there, I think it's just marginal. You know, so there's millions of games have been sold, not as many as either of my peers here. But we've hit the hearts. You know, there was I heard someone say recently about testing that was done at Dodge trucks, and they came up with this new truck that they called the Ram, and they focus tested it, and this was talked about at DICE, and you know, 50% of the people just hated it, but the other 50% just loved it. You know, so of course a lot of the tendency for the financial people is that they don't want 50% of the people hating it. But someone who has the balls to defend that because 50% love it, there's something there. You know, don't throw it out because it isn't hitting everyone. If you can capture the hearts of of a significant portion. Maybe there's a lot more waiting to unfold that they haven't been able to see yet. And so Dodge Ram then went on to be one of the hugest selling trucks at Dodge in their line and revitalized a brand name for that automotive maker. And so the further you move away from Jason's paradigm, the more risky your territory on getting good returns on the investment of the game. But I think that when we see in the video game industry, and I don't think the video game industry has really seen the breakout hit yet. In my opinion, it hasn't happened yet. Now, there's a lot of hits, and there's a lot of big sellers, and a lot of things, but there's not the one that wakes up the rest of the world. I mean, games have a big market today, but it's nothing next to people that watch movies. We still ask each other, do you play games? We don't ask each other, do you watch movies? And it's my firm belief that in the future, you won't have to ask that question because everyone will. They just won't be in such a small box that they exist in today, and they're going to break out. But a lot of that breakout is going to occur because that synergy between the non-compromising spirit of the artist has somehow found a marriage with commerce.
One thing I would say is that when a Naughty Dog game hits the shelf, or when it's at E3, no one looks at it and says, wow, they made a conscious decision not to go for art. A lot of people think their first idea or their inspiration is brilliant, and then it can't be changed. My theory is that if you refine it and continually look at it in terms of the marketplace, you will find eventually an equally inspired way of doing things, but that works for the marketplace. And so it's worth saying, let's put the marketplace in there. Let's make the marketplace very valuable. Let's make what we can do with this character or this game as important as our inspiration and our feeling that we're doing what's in our gut. And in the end, nobody but the person who said, oh man, now I got to redesign what I thought was a killer guy knows. Everybody else says, and we've won awards for this over the years, your game is art. Your game is beautiful. Your game is something that no one else has done. They don't know that we were targeting the market directly. Right. And I always say to my guys, there is no National Endowment of the Arts support for video games. Right. When there is, we'll talk about keeping your inspirations. Until that happens, let's make sure we stay afloat. I'd like to say one more.
And I want to say, too, even in the creation of Abe, he's actually quite strategically designed for the market. It's just not through the traditional channels. So when we look at we came out of designing 15-second commercials to sell Procter & Gamble's products, whoever. It was about how do we impact, how do we cut through, how do we cut through the airwaves, how do we cut through the shelf space, how do we cut through the clutter of the magazines, how do we cut through? And so I headed in an opposite direction. When everything's cute and cuddly, we need to make something ugly that has heart. And I'd show them a drawing, and they'd say, why? Just look at his lips, man. He's spit shut. What happened to him? And I'd say, and then I had the benefit of being able to go, well, this is his voice, and this is what he feels about, and this is his dilemma. And look, man, he's screwed. So you got to help him. And they're like, oh, and I go, and it's going to cut through. So as some people have told me, just like what Jason said, that that's a very you just did what you want, but it's not unconscious of the market conditions. In fact, it's very strategically designed, but it's designed to retain the heart, because that's what I personally want to do, and the people that we attract want to do. And if we're really smart, we can retain the heart and hit the mark.
Well, Nagoshi-san, you take a very different approach to the character creation process. And do you ever have to worry about you or your designers becoming uninspired? And if that's the case, what do you do to keep their energy, to keep the energy up, to keep the creative juices flowing?
基本的にはもう待つしかないんですけど、時間があるので、いろんな手段は取ります。
Basically talking, I will wait for the inspiration to come back. But when we have more time, I will try many things.
で、基本的に、その パーソナリティが違うから、マッチした方法っていうのはそれぞれ違うんだけど、おおよそいい方法は、まあちょっとそれは直接最終的なものを作るんではなくて、思いつくための一つの手段だからっていうことを分かってほしいんですけど、まあ真似をするっていうのも一つだと思うんですよ、僕は。だからその売れたものないし自分が好きなものでも何でもいいですけど、それを作るエッセンスのこの部分を抜き取ろうとか、この部分からちょっとどうしてこれってこういうことになったのかなというか、このキャラクターどうしてこのじゃなきゃいけなかったのかなっていうのをもう一回そのキャラクター作った人間の気持ちになって、掘り下げて分解して分析してみたりとか、そういったことっていうのは結構次のきっかけになったりする時は多いみたいです。
Each artist has a different personality, so the method can differ. But generally talking, as a process to the kind of evoke that inspiration, I tell them to this method is not to finalize a character. However, during the course of a process, I encourage the people to look at the other characters to copy some good points, or to find out what's the favorite point about the character, or to just kind of take out the essence of the different characters, and so that the artist can be in the shoe of the other artist and take a different approach. So sometimes I encourage the artists to do that.
本当はゲームを見てゲームからゲームを作るっていう考え方、僕は本当は大嫌いなんですけど、しょうがない時はそういう手を取ったりします。
Basically, I don't like the method to make a game out of other games, but when I'm desperate, I use the method.
That probably goes for all of us.
Yeah. Now, we've talked a little bit about how characters evolve during a project and how all the forces from marketing, production, game design interact on the character. At what point does a character become final in the game? You actually addressed this a little bit. You're talking about when the cinematics come up, but are your characters actually changing in slight ways until the very end of the game, or do you have them nailed down within the first couple months?
In our experience, it's been a little constrained, the flexibility, once production really kicks in, because we also have games that we build movies within that stagger throughout. And those movies take as long to make as the game did, just in a different department. And so you wind up locking into a design probably sooner than you would like to, and that is the most healthy. But to make that type of an experience, that's what you pretty much need to do, because there's only so much money and there's only so much time. And I think in general in this whole topic, there's kind of a whole nother talk about managing artists. You know, how do you get them to be inspired, yet also go home, you know, to be inspired that what they're doing is good, but not good enough, and still go home and not really sleep well until they feel like they're hitting the mark, you know, which is ultimately where the artist likes to exist. But
at some point you had to put your foot down and say,
yeah,
okay, guys, we're done. And where is that? Has it been consistent for you guys in your projects?
I think it's after you really prove that the play is happening. You know, that's where I find a comfort zone in it. It's like when I can really prove that the play is happening, then we go, okay, the character's safe. We can head more into the movies. We can pretty much put those shots in the can. We're not going to recomposite a changed figure back in, you know.
In a certain sense, we've been lucky because we've always done game engine cutscenes. So the way that our technology's been set up, and this was true in Crash, it's true in Jak and Daxter, 3 days before you go Gold Master, not that you would want to, you could change the character.
Does this have any impact on
graphically? Yes, obviously. But if you had to, for some reason, change the character, you could do it. So when is it final? It's final when everyone stops asking it to change. It really is for us, from a visual standpoint, when it becomes final. Animations can be swapped in and out. Now, there's a deadline, and we have not missed a deadline since Crash 1. actually in Naughty Dog's history, but with the relevant titles, the bigger titles. Crash 1 was on time, Crash 2 was on time, 3, Crash Team Racing, Jak and Daxter, all on time. So we will never make a change after the date in which it will impact that final date. And that's very important in console industry because Christmas is your sell season. But technically, we can change things extremely late in the project. And in fact, there have been times when we have changed things after marketing has already shown the character. Eye colors have changed. Clothing has changed slightly. If it's survivable, we will do it if we think it's an improvement. We always obviously contact marketing. We're not going to all of a sudden say, hey, our character changed. But we do have the ability to change very late in the project. And that's been a very big boon to us because there are times where you realize, well, that color eye isn't going to work for that character in that territory. And you want to be able to change that at the last minute. So we have a very flexible system.
Nagoshi-san, would you like to comment?
僕も多分彼と同じ感じだと思う。ギリギリまで、いじれるところまでいじって、いじってはならないはずのものをまたこっそりいじって、でバレて怒られたりとか喧嘩になったりとか、まあそういうのはもう普通です。
I'm probably very similar to Jason. Can you hear? I'll just try to work on the character until the last moment that I'm allowed. And then sometimes I just work on the character even if I'm not allowed. And then sometimes they find out and then we have affliction. But until the last moment, I try to work on the character.
One thing that's always amazed me is that after 4 months of working on Jak, we got to a state where we were absolutely sure we had the perfect character. And then we stopped designing him, and a few months later, someone drew a new sketch, and it was better. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure if I worked 50 years on the same character, which might have happened and still might happen at some point, 50 years after we start, we'll still be able to improve it. Mm-hmm. And if you look at any of the characters that have been out there, you look at Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse looks nothing like he looks today when he started. Right. They've been redesigning that character incrementally every few years and changing it. And it gets better looking every time. And you would think that at some point they would have reached the perfect Mickey, but they never will. And Bugs Bunny continually gets changed and updated. So the inability to change, I think, is a bad thing because it might restrict you from making that character that much more compelling for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And we did change Crash game in and game out a little bit, just a little bit.
I think there's something there too in that in the technology flexibility that you're talking about. You know, there's a lot of people asked us as this generation of hardware was coming about, well, why are you going to do pre-rendered movies again? You know, why don't you just do it in real time? And we go, for what we're after, it's not there yet, and because we're trying to strum a lot of heartstrings, and that takes place through a lot of subtleties in animation, you know, and so can I get those facial expressions? Can I get that stuff? Well, we'll get closer to it with the evolution of tools, but even though we have a new installation of hardware that's more capable of delivering that type of facial expression, it's still a significant investment to make those tools be able to deliver that within your game engine, while at the same time you're trying to use the investment to produce better gameplay in the engine. So like today, we're looking at how the game and movies get more blurred for the experience so that the real high res, you know, subtle, the stuff that should make you want to cry or should make you really want to hate someone that's taking place in the content of the experience, that probably at this point in time in our book still requires a pre-rendered, you know, really high resolution. It'll take 30 minutes a frame. It'll have all these details in there. But when we're 30 feet away, we're seeing that we can get away with the real-time imagery, and you don't really tell the transition in the new experimental stuff that we're doing. But as the tools evolve, because you don't get the budget to build all those tools to get the facial expressions and stuff. I mean, if you've got the programming crew that, you know, Naughty Dog has, and you're ahead of most of us. But we all don't have that same skill set. And so we need to see an evolution of tools continue to occur so that in time, the system is capable of playing back a highly expressive character in high detail that gives it more believability. But but you didn't have to invest it all in one job, because that might have been at the expense of a great deal of your play. And if that's the case, that could kill your game.
I think a little bit of that belays your background versus, say, my background. I started in video games when you got 8x8 pixels. So for us to have facial expression, unbelievable. 15 years. I watched Mario, who had no personality, go to Sonic, who was fast. That's his personality. Go to Crash, who I believe was the first character action game character to have facial animation with every frame of animation. And at the very beginning of Crash, he turns around and changes his face right in front of you, and people attach themselves to the character at that point beyond what they had done before. And I think this is the reason for Crash's success, because he had emotion. Now we've got Daxter, who's got minutes and minutes of fully rendered animation. He's a 3,000 polygon character with all of the facial stuff. The game we're putting out next year, we're up to 12,000 polygons for Daxter in his facial expressions. For me, I get enough out of that.
Yeah.
And the fact that interactivity has always been about the ability to have change. Time of day in Jak and Daxter, it can be any time of day when you're talking to someone. Because it's a real-time engine, it can be any time of day when you talk to somebody. You can go smash a barrel behind somebody. You can in the second village, there's some barrels behind the geologist that you speak to. Smash the barrels, go talk to her. The barrels aren't there at any time of day. Real-time engine gives you the ability to attach those cut sequences into the game. And as things get better, I think we'll get the cut sequences to act a lot less like cut sequences. And I look forward to the day, when we'll never get to where rendered is. Rendered is always ahead. That's the definition of rendered is you can take more time per frame, right? So rendered will always be ahead. But from my standpoint, having those abilities to be interactive, even with the cutscenes, is such a boon that I was extremely excited by the ability to do all of this stuff real time.
I'd like to change gears just a little bit and talk about one of the things that has plagued probably all of us from the beginning of our careers, and that is how do you create a character with worldwide appeal? I think it's something that very few people have been able to crack, but is there any kind of is there a process that you guys use to ensure, or at least to try to ensure, that your characters are going to be popular in the Japanese market as well as the U.S. market and the European markets?
I can tell you a mistake.
That's just as good.
We made a mistake in that we weren't aware that in the creation of Abe, we got almost to the very end of the project, and GT Interactive had a publishing partner in Japan that was very excited, and it was really an individual, but he was the guy you wanted excited. It was Masayoshi-san, the owner of SoftBank, and he gave the game to his daughters, and they loved it. So if you could get him behind it, I mean, he is the Bill Gates of Japan. He was excited about Abe. So it was like, great, we're going to see a great Abe launch in Japan. And then this red flag came back that said, whoa, this Four Fingers, man, it's got to go. And we said, what? What are you talking about? Mickey's got Four Fingers. He's in Japan. Well, yes, but Mickey pays a non-discriminatory organization in Japan $5 million a year to have Four Fingers in Japan. And then you find out that there's a cultural history where there's prejudices built in to four-fingered characters. And so what we did was we responded as quickly as we could, and we re-rendered the cutscenes. We didn't change the game database because it was 2D sprites still, and you couldn't really tell. But we re-rendered the most offensive cutscenes and changed his hand, And then we left him that way for the next game, and people said, what happened to Abe's other finger? And I went, oh, he lost it in Japan. But that was a mistake. We didn't understand the culture, and therefore the character, if you didn't modify, it wasn't going to go over well. And it still didn't go over well, But that's another story.
Yeah, if we have a secret, is that we have our Japanese producers. Actually, Shimizu-san is sitting in the audience right now. He's one of our Japanese producers. Come every 2 months and look at everything we do, and it isn't in the game until he and the other people that come say that it's good. And if they have questions, I'm sure they send it back to Japan and take a wider poll. Having said that, I know that Spyro went through a very similar process, and the difference in Crash sales and Spyro sales, I'm sorry to say, was night and day. And I remember going over and seeing the Abe's advertising in Japan, in Akihabara, and saying this game's got a hit. I mean, it's plastered on every wall. It's finally an American game that's getting the full push, and it did get the full push, and they spent a huge amount of money on it, and it didn't happen. So it is very, very touch and go. I know that even in Europe, and Europe versus the United States, there are massive differences. Jack and Daxter did extremely well in France. It didn't do as well in some other countries. Crash in Australia, possibly because he was a bandicoot and it's Australian animal, was wildly successful. I think on a unit per person basis, it did better in Australia than anywhere else in the world. Jack and Daxter did not. The world is a very, very complex place with a lot of different unique perspectives. And it is extremely hard to create a character that works in all. And our best attempt at it is to ask as many people in as many cultures for opinions. I wish I could put the character in front of 1,000 people and 1,000 cultures. I can't. So I do the best I can.
Nagoshi-san, would you have any, when you're designing your characters and you're thinking about the overseas sales, were there any specific considerations that you made for sales for the European or the United States audiences?
そうですね、まあ、一般的に日本とは違うっていうことは特に言われてるんですけども、僕自身まだはっきりとは分かってないと思うんですよ、正直言って。もし分かってたらもっと結果もちゃんと出せてると思うし、それはまだ僕には足りないところだと正直思う。
People say that Japan is generally so different from the U.S. and Europe. But however, honestly talking, I really don't see the difference clearly yet. But if I can see it, probably I can do a better job, of course. So it's a kind of, for me, it's the area to learn, and I'm still working on it.
Well, perhaps I can turn the question around a little bit. When American characters don't, or European characters do not succeed in the Japanese market, do you think there is a specific reason or a design characteristic that prevents that from happening? Or is there anything about the Japanese audience that you can tell us that might help us who design characters in the Western world to understand?
日本人っていうのはやっぱりそのキャラクターのルックスであったりとか表に出ないところまで隅から隅までそのディティールというか設定というかそういうところまですごいこだわって好むんですね。そういう部分の方にすごくこだわりを持つんだけど、多分それは東洋的というか日本的というかで西洋の場合はもう少し、ドラフティックにもう訴えかけるものがパーンと分かりやすいものが、目に飛び込んでくるスピード感があるというかね、そういうたくましさみたいな方が優先されるような気がするんで、僕も、アメリカでもヨーロッパでもゲームのキャラクターで知ってるけども詳細はほとんど知らないんですよ現に、だからそういうのは情報が手に入ってないっていうことも少しマーケティングに日本でのマーケティングに影響がしてるのかなって気はします。
First of all, I have to talk about the character of Japanese. The Japanese, the people really like the detail and also the hidden part, so that they want to really know about the character in detail, and they want to find out something unusual about the character, and it maybe I will say it's very Oriental. They want to read in between lines. But Western characters, it's very direct. They express everything on the screen, and they like something very dynamic. So maybe the difference of a character, they want to, Japanese people want to find out about the hidden part of the character. So that something indicate, you have to show something, some indication about the character in the game. And then the second reason of difficulty is that I know a lot of characters of the US and Europe, but I don't know the detail of the character. It means that there's not enough information provided to Japanese people regarding the characters. So if Japanese people obtain more information regarding the characters, it might help.
So let me ask a follow-up question. In your opinion, then, does that mean the visuals are less important than the actual myth or personalities of the characters, myth behind the characters or the stories that we're telling?
そうですね。そしてそれを次のマーチャンダイズのフックに使ったりとか、きっかけに使ったりとか、いうことは日本では結構多いです。
You are right. And in Japan, there's a tendency that they use that kind of a trait for that kind of a hook for the next merchandising. And then, because of that, the mini games that can be sold more.
Okay.
One thing to make sure you don't do, no matter what your character design, is for the Japanese market, don't have a dark, in terms of screen intensity, don't have a dark game. They don't sell dark games. And I found this out, yeah, except for Resident Evil. I can't figure that out. It happens. But we found that out the hard way. You know? And then the reasons for it is you just could never foresee, which is that a lot of gamers in Japan play with their shades open in their homes. So they play at an average room brightness, you know, that's brighter than we usually do. You know, we tend to close down and get into darker rooms to play our games. They don't. And that was one of, you know, our problems. Our game was too dark.
I think looking at the future, too, this is going to be an issue, internationalization of characters. Sony is making quite a large push into Korea. Korea is a massive PC gaming market. Totally different culture yet again. China eventually, as globalization proceeds, to be a globalized economy, you have to have people online. If you're going to be online, you're going to want a cheap solution for getting people online. It's quite possible that those will be game systems. If this happens, then you're looking at the great world cultures, many of which are completely outside of video games right now. Hindu culture. The Middle East has great potential in terms of the number of people versus the number that play. China, the Confucian civilization. Totally different ways of looking at reality. And yet massive markets that are guaranteed to open. So if it's a problem today and we have discussions about Japanese characters versus American characters or Western characters, wait until it's how Hindu people versus Muslim cultures versus Confucian cultures versus Japanese cultures versus Western versus all the other cultures. There's 7 or 8 great cultures, and I don't mean they're better than others. I just mean in terms of populations. When we have to look at those 7 or 8 great cultures out there and figure out how to make a character for all of them, because it's going to be the greatest return on investment, and we're going to be doing $100 million games very, very shortly here. I would say 5 years, 10 years. When we're spending that money, we're going to want to be spending it on a character that's going to work everywhere, and I don't know how we're going to do that. I can tell you, we just hired a very famous Japanese game developer, a designer, to work at Naughty Dog to attempt to even further get ourselves involved in the Japanese market. There may come a day where I have a pool of people from each culture, experienced people, that can tell me whether or not this character is going to work or not in all these cultures. And it's going to be very interesting. The counter-argument is globalization is going to bring us all to more homogeneity. But that's not going to happen as quickly, I think, as we're all going to market to each other. So I believe in the foreseeable future, we're going to have very big challenges in this direction.
Well, you've mentioned that you want to put your games in front of 1,000 people. And what about focus testing? I mean, what about using the resources that, say, publishers offer to put it in front of a Chinese market or a number of Korean game players or European game players and seeing how things come out? In other words, are focus tests reliable? Are they even worth pursuing for those of us who are trying to design characters for the worldwide market?
Focus tests are great. We focus test in Japan, we focus test in the United States, and we focus test in Europe. The problem is that in Japan, maybe you get a good cross-section. In the United States, maybe you get a good cross-section. Europe services 80 territories, and they are not focus testing in Saudi Arabia or Qatar, although they sell games to Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're not focus testing in South Africa or in Australia or in New Zealand or in any of the South American countries that they PAL territories. And to do a focus test in each one of those countries may be too much data. You may get back so much data you can't work with it. So I don't know how you go beyond right now what we're doing.
And the viability of that focus testing is highly questionable. You know, there's different schools of thought even in the advertising industry, and I don't even think they really think about it as much as it manifests this way. You have the hardcore creatives that used to come out of agencies like Chiat in New York and would, you know, the Apple 1984 campaign, these like breakthrough campaigns that were driven by creative people saying, I need to cut through, and they're just searching, and they have a fair amount of information as to what they're trying to target for a solution. Tell them I'll be there in a minute. And then you have another school of thought, which is let's focus test the market. Let's let that create a box for us, and then let's work inside that box. And that usually produces some extremely mediocre results. And that is a common phenomena in the advertising and the promotions of this industry, which is just mind-blowing. You know, I'm blown away at the lack of creativity in the marketing and the advertising of this industry. You have some of the most exciting types of consumer electronic software experiences that have ever been on planet Earth.
Yeah, it's not soap.
And it's not advertised as nearly as exciting as a bar of soap is, you know, or a glass of milk, or a cookie, or a dog food campaign. You know, it's just amazing. This industry is so inside the box when it comes to thinking about focus testing, marketing, advertising. Yeah, and a lot of the reason is because it hasn't attracted the really creative advertising people. You know, because those guys are making some serious cash, and they win, and when they make a commercial and they design a campaign, they want Clio awards. You know, and you don't hear that in this industry. You don't hear people saying, I'm going out. You only see a Mortal Monday come about once in a while. You know, that's the most memorable campaign I remember, was Mortal Monday, the Mortal Kombat guys screaming. That was a great campaign, and it was a great game, and it sold great. But that's an area where this industry really needs to grow up, and it doesn't get it yet. It doesn't see it yet. And so the focus testing results, I think as a good designer, you should listen, you know, but to the degree that you implement, you really have to be cautious, and you really have to try and be wise about that, because they can be and are often wrong.
Nagoshi-san, do you use focus test data, or do you believe that it's a viable way to inform you when you're creating characters?
使いますし、とても有効だと思います。
I'm using a monitor, the focus test a lot, and I find it very effective.
ただ、難しいですね。全部確かに今おっしゃられたように、全てじゃあそれを受け入れるわけにもなかなかいかないし、個人的な意見に近いものも多いし、だから別にこうまとめに入るわけじゃないですけど、きっと謙虚にちゃんと聞くということと、自分は間違ってないはずだっていうプライドの部分とのバランスをどれぐらいちゃんと保てるかっていうところで、バランスのまさにその作った本人のマインドのバランスがいい状態が初めていい製品につながるんだと思うんで、そのフォーカステストの結果をどういうふうに読むか分析が正しくないと次の行動が正しくないんで、それだけはちゃんとしようってことは僕はすごい心がけています。
But as Lorne mentioned, that we cannot always take all the results into our work. Some of the results are very personal, and also it's not always true. But I think it's very important for us to be very humble about the results and the test. The most important thing is the balance of our mind. That we have to have a certain the humbleness, but also we have to have certain pride and then the conviction on our work. So I think when we have a very good balance in our mind, that we can conduct a very correct analysis. And then if we have a very correct analysis, then we can do a good job.
I think you have to interpret the results too. We generally don't pay as much attention to a question that's asked like, is this game fun, than we do to watching how many people are looking away from the television during a 3-hour, 4-hour focus test, or how many people stand up and walk to the bathroom or ask when lunch is. You can, and we do, save data when we're in focus tests of where people die. And actually, Shimizu-san had to do this once, put a little X on a map for everybody where they died in the level. And if you got a bunch of red X's in one corner, guess what? It's too hard there. That's data that you can get that you don't have to interpret, and it's very hard for those people to be lying to you. It's very hard for the day, the weather, the food you serve them, to change that. They're simply having a hard time in that area, or they're getting bored of your game and walking away from the television. And you can tell a lot, I think, from focus tests. Now, if you have 16 to 18-year-olds in a room and you're living or dying on whether or not they say the character is cool or not, I think you're putting way too much weight into a test of 20 people. At that age, they don't even want to talk about things in front of each other because they fear that the other people think they're geeks or whatever. So yeah, it's cool. Or it's easier always to say, it's all right. And if you're going to put your life or death on that, you're not going to get anything. But if you're watching them play and they're looking around at each other to see if each other are having fun because they are, well, that's information. And if they start talking to each other, that's information. Your game's not compelling to them. If they button through your cutscenes, you're wasting your time on your cutscenes, or you're not doing good cutscenes. You can watch that stuff, and they can't lie. It's body language. They can't lie about that stuff.
I wish that we had focus testing on the first Ape games, because they proved too difficult for a lot of people, and we get too close to it. I think all of us as developers get too close to the game. And so a lot of people got frustrated. If we had been able to have early focus testing on those are the real red flags that I feel the designers really need to pay attention to, is the kill points, the frustration points. No one's lying about being frustrated. If you see if you watch these focus testing sessions when someone's doing it well, and it's like an interrogation room, right? You're behind a two-way mirror, and you're looking at them. And like Jason's saying, if you're asking them their opinions on stuff, you'll watch two guys kind of going, but then they'll hear the guy that they think is cool, or the cute girl in the room, say that she likes it, and then they're like, oh, yeah.
Never put young kids and old kids in the same focus test.
They're instantly influenced. But the frustration factor, if you can pay attention to that, that's
I actually have
key.
A question for Nagoshi-san. Was Super Monkey Ball tested in the United States before the characters were finalized? Not that don't read anything into that question. I'm just curious. Was Super Monkey Ball's characters focus tested in the United States before they were considered final?
最初はダメでした、正直言って。
In the focus test, the first focus test, the result was very bad.
で、一番の理由はキャラクターがダメだって言われた。
The main reason was that they didn't like character.
で、そしてまあでもそれは逆に言えば僕も計算のうちだったんですよ。日本にはいいと思ったけど、海外は正直言って自信がなかったんで仕方がない結果かなと思ってた。
But that result, I kind of anticipated the results. I was pretty confident about the character in Japan, but I wasn't quite sure about the overseas. So that the result I anticipated in a certain level.
Did you change anything?
それで変えたんですか？
でも僕は自信があったんで、その場合はもうほとんど聞かなかったというか、キャラクターで遊ぶ要素が、ルックスの要素がすごく強いものであれば違うけども、このゲームの場合はちょっと違うので、自分が表現したい方を素直に取って問題ないだろうと思って変えなかったんですよ。
I didn't change it because I thought this game doesn't have an impact on the looks, the kind of appearance of the character.
We have very little time remaining. I wanted to ask one more question. I hope you guys can give a fairly concise answer, and then we're going to open it up for a few minutes of questions from the audience, okay? This year we are seeing a huge influx of new character action games featuring new characters. And every year, the market seems to get a little bit more crowded. And I know as somebody who runs a team of people who are trying to create characters, we're coming up with ideas all the time and then discarding them because it's been done. So are we getting to the point where it's much more difficult to come up with a character that's not derivative and that really is original? Have you guys found this? And what do you think the future is for brand new, completely original characters in the genre?
I think it's much easier to find unique space in character design than it is unique space in gameplay. So I would easily trade the two if I could.
Good answer.
Yeah.
I think that what we're going to see is many more of the sensibilities that come from film and traditional animation become a larger factor in what's driving the design, whereas in the history of the game, the play has been the largest factor in driving the design. And that's the challenge of the entertainment industry overall, that it is always a sea of Me Too's. And so how do you cut through that? And it will always be a challenge. And so for me, what I see on the floor today doesn't feel any different from what I saw on the floor 5 years ago on a relative perspective, you know. And so you're still looking at how do we cut through? Where's the different ideas? What's the thing that might have the possibility of shining through where all of these look very similar?
Answer. Nagoshi-san.
その質問に関しては僕個人で言うともう僕も13年働いていて業界で辛くなってきたのは正直認めます。だけど僕の下の世代の子はなんだこんなキャラクターだったら僕の方が全然いいもの作れるって多分思ってると思うんですよ。でそういう人たちがこの状況をどんどんまた変えていってくれるし、また彼らがキャリアが上がって頃にまた新しい世代が生まれて変わっていくし、だから新しい環境、新しい時代があった上で新しいクリエイターがまた誕生してっていう、そういうクリエイターをちゃんと発掘して育てる環境さえあれば、新しいキャラクターが出てくることに関しては全然業界にとって心配はないと僕は思います。
Personally talking, I've been working in this industry for 13 years, and honestly talking, it's getting harder for me. However, when I see that the next generations, younger generation, they have a different idea, and then they said that it's really the piece of cake. So I know that when the situation changes and the environmental changes and the creators are changed, then I don't think we will have not so much problem about creating new characters. So the only thing we have to be careful is to really discover good creators and then raise them in the right direction.
I think if you drew a giant square and at one corner you put the Disney American cartoon style, at another corner you put Japanese classic animation style, anime, manga, at the other corner you put realistic, and then at the fourth corner you put Oddworld would probably go down right around there. The line between the clusters around the three corners of realistic, anime, and Disney are chock full of games. Halfway between anime and Disney, you get maybe Jack and Daxter, games like that. There are a bunch out there. They've been done. Likewise, realistic to cartoon is a little full. But that's really an L at the edge, and the odd corner, we don't approach it. And odd is, if you think about it, the broadest, because odd anything. And heading off the edges towards that odd corner leaves us massive amounts of real estate to design characters. And in a lot of ways, Lorne was the first to head in that direction. There haven't been that weird a character action character from many other people. But it succeeded, which shows that out there's valuable real estate that's going cheap.
Yep. It's disturbing that it comes so naturally.
Well, great answers, guys. And I'd like to offer up the opportunity for people to answer questions. And if you could, when I call on you, come down and talk into the mic so everybody can hear you. I think the first person was this gentleman here with the camcorder. Do you mind talking into the mic?
Good afternoon. First, I would like to say that out of the 2 days of conferences, I think this was probably most influential for myself because I'm an art student at the School of Visual Arts in New York.
I went there.
All right. So the question I have for the panel is when, you get this, this plethora, this fresh array of students, coming out of school and they're trying to get into the field, for the design-based. What do you look for in these students? Well, graduates. And I have a follow-up for Jason, and I want to know, when it comes to like these fresh students and these fresh ideas that come out, you mentioned that, when you get these people to work for you, that they understand that they're trying to express their art and they're trying to give something so that way they could possibly put on their wall or put something towards themselves, per personal pride. But then you mentioned that you're not trying to gear towards personal art. You're trying to appeal to the general public. So how do you work with that person, to, you keep that person like malleable to work for you?
Maybe I can answer that first before the hiring question. You have to understand that I'm not asking people to walk away from art. If you've sold 6 million units of a title, which we've done with 3 titles, you've seen it all over the place. People come up to you and say, "Oh, you worked on that? My nephew plays that. He loves it." You get the same smile on your face, and I'm convinced it's a bigger smile than you get when you create something you really love for yourself and no one ever tells you it's good. So the difficulty is not tearing art out of people or the desire to do art. I'm not trying to neuter them of their art. I'm trying to get them to realize that give it a chance, do something that's a little more mass market. And as soon as you get the high of succeeding, you never have to talk to that person again. Certain personalities don't want any direction. They're artists. And those people are fine. I have no problem with them. They just can't work at Naughty Dog. So those people need to go somewhere else. And like I said, if they can get National Endowment of Arts to fund them, more power to them. We're not funding them. If I can get them to give me that first game, that first time that they have to compromise on what they consider art to be, as soon as they get the high of succeeding, never have to think about it again. And they'll go to the next artist and say, "I used to think like you. I used to think that the only thing that was important was that I succeeded in doing my own thing. So every now and then I go home and I take out a piece of paper and I draw my own characters, or I throw paint on a wall, or I do whatever I need to do to be art. But when I go into work, my art is a different art. It's the art of making people happy. It's the art of making characters that everybody loves. And either you have the personality to make that change, and I feel you'll be a better artist in the industry, or you don't have the personality to make that change, and you can be a great artist somewhere else. That's the way I look at it. And I look at people, when I'm talking to them, a designer, and I try to judge their character and their malleability in terms of this. Show me some of the work you've done. This character you've designed here, it's kind of cool, but I don't think it would sell to the mass market. What would you think if we wanted to use him, but we wanted to change this, that, and the other thing? That's my character. I designed this character. I like you. You're a nice guy, but I'm sorry you can't work here. You're a nice girl. I'm sorry. You need to work somewhere else. Sure, no problem. That would be cool. That's the kind of person I want to work with. So that's how I determine it.
It's the difference between being an artist and being a pro.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And so I think actually he adequately answered the question that you posed to Lorne as well. So that
Yeah, I think he nailed it.
Other questions? Let's go to this gentleman right here.
He nailed it for him too.
My question goes to the L proposal that you had,
Right.
and the odd stuff on the corner that we don't seem to be doing a lot of.
Right.
And my question, a lot of it goes to Lorne too, which is how do we get marketing people in the publishing firms to actually allow that to happen? Because like you're saying, you go to the marketing people and you say, what type of games sell to people? And they're definitely not going to that weird unknown spot at all, and that would not even think about going there. And if you do say something like that, the first thing they usually will say is, well, is that type of game like Mortal Kombat, or is it like Crash, or what type of game is it like? Well, it's like something you've never seen before. And usually the blank looks on marketing people's face when you tell them that your idea is something they can't get a handle on at all. They'll usually say, well, see you later, we want something else. How do you get around that? How did you get around that with Abe?
Well, we haven't. Got to admit, we haven't, There's been people with good intent that have been part of the advertising marketing teams at different times, but I don't feel we've ever hit it. We've done some okay stuff. I think a large degree of it is the way that this industry evolved. This evolved out of first a coin-op business, and then secondly a toy industry.
Yeah.
And in the advertising way, it's still thinking that way. And so it goes, no, this is how I sell a game. And you go, but I can sit down with someone who swears that they hate games, and I can sell them a PS2 or an Xbox in a half an hour. Now that's a half an hour. Now how do we turn that half an hour into a 30-second, compressed spot? But there's a lot of people that would be playing these games, but it just hasn't been dished out to them right yet. And I think it's an evolutionary problem with the industry that someone will break through. Maybe it'll be like a rock star or somebody, a Sam Hauser, who's really willing to break and bend the rules and say, no, it should be done this way, and this is what I want. And if you know Sam, he's pretty intense on what he wants, and it's working for him. And if that doesn't happen, then I think it's just a process of maturity for the industry. The money will bring the higher talent, and they'll override the guy who goes, but I got 15 years experience in this industry. But he doesn't really know shit about advertising. And I'm not saying that everyone in this industry is like that, but there's a lot of them.
Here's what I'd do. I've said in many talks that I've given that you have to find a niche. You have to carve out a piece of the market to be yourself. Gran Turismo is a wonderful racing game, and anybody that tries to beat it with the same game is going to fail because it's already the top dog in its industry. Naughty Dog, Crash you may not think of as being unique or pushing it, but we pushed it in being the first ones to try to give emotion to a character and give him a facial animation. We also carved a niche out because we were the first PlayStation 2 character action game. Had we been Crash on the Nintendo 64, same character would have failed because he didn't have a market against Mario. He wouldn't have had a market against Sonic. The only reason he succeeded was because he was the first on the PlayStation. We consciously came out last year with Jak and Daxter to establish ourselves again as the first on the PlayStation 2 and try to create the idea that everybody else is chasing us. That's our strategy. To work early, work hard. We skipped the last game we could have done on the PS1 and made a killing to make a game that came out when there weren't as many PS2s to establish ourselves in that part of the marketing. And also Naughty Dog has a name, and we have the ability to place that name on the new character. If I were not Naughty Dog, if I didn't have an open market, and there are none now, maybe on the Xbox, but I think that Oddworld really has a lot of attachment to the Xbox now. What I would say to the marketing people would be, I would again tie it to land. You can try to copy the big guy in the industry. You'll never beat him. You can't beat Mario on Nintendo. So the only way to carve out a new piece for yourself is to head west. If you try in New York City to buy into the high land market, you can't make as much money in New York City as you could, say, 300, 400 years ago or 200 years ago when people were moving across country by being the first guy to go out into St. Louis. And the guy that bought big land in St. Louis took a risk, but it paid off, and he ended up being multimillionaire for going in St. Louis. Couldn't have competed in New York. Nobody jumped straight to California. It slowly moved across country. Lorne's got huge balls to go right for California and do the Oddworld guys. But I would say, let's move a little bit west. Let's head towards the Mississippi and do something that isn't just another fuzzy creature with a cool attitude. That's New York. That's been done. That city's already built, and you're not going to be the big dog in that city. Try to head a little bit west and do something that has a catch and say to the marketing people, look, the third best-selling sports franchise is not a franchise. It's a failure and a money loss. The fourth best-selling character action, third best-selling character action is not a third best-selling. It's the third least selling. It sells nothing. So let's try to capture our niche. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take a little risk. We're not going to head to California immediately. but we're going to head towards the Mississippi. That's what I would say to the marketing people. See if you can turn them on to that idea. Because there's 15 games on the floor that I walk by that have no chance to unseat, Mario or Jack and Daxter. They just don't, because they're copying the guy who has the top dog position.
Nagoshi-san, would you like to comment on that? Yeah. Would you like to make any comments on that?
いや、ないです。
Okay.
Just say, if you were to sit in a Madison Avenue advertising agency, and they were selling cake mix, they would not be talking about what's special about this cake mix, because they know no one cares. So they're not even going to waste their time in that area. What they're going to talk about is guilt sells cake mix. So we need to figure out how to make mothers feel guilty that they're not making cakes for their kids. That's how they sell cake mix. And that's how most of the products that no one really cares about are sold. It's through the psychology of selling. And in our industry, we're still saying, no, the commercial has to have game screens because we've done focus testing and it shows they want to see gameplay. It's like, yeah, they think they want to see gameplay. But Final Fantasy, I haven't seen a commercial yet where it shows gameplay. And they're selling more than almost all of us.
In the drink industry, Seagram's, if they wanted to bring out a drink, they wouldn't say, Coke sells well, Pepsi sells well, let's make a cola. You can't win that war, right? You just can't win that war. So they say, Coke sells well, Pepsi sells well, the drink market is huge. Someone goes and creates Snapple. That's a market, something new. Somebody goes and creates one of those wacky teas. That's new. And then everybody copies them. But those guys, again, are going after Coke and Pepsi. Snapple's still the big name in fruit drinks because they were first. They carved out the market. I got lucky. Nobody made a character action game on the PlayStation before Crash. I don't know why. I didn't have a connection with Sony at the time. I just said, I'm going to make the mascot for Sony. It never became the mascot, but I got to be the top dog. So when you're choosing a game, don't go after Coke and Pepsi. Don't try to take on Carmack in the first-person shooter genre. You're not going to win. You're simply not going to win that.
Right.
Do something different. That's where you're going to make your money. And if you can convince the marketing people using analogies in marketing that they would agree with, you might get there. You might get them to finally turn their direction. Because right now they're saying, let's do a cola. Okay, I see cola. We got to do cola. We got to do another sports game. We got to do another first-person shooter. We got to do another fuzzy character. It's hard.
We're running a little bit over. I hope you don't mind. We have time for one more question. So, sorry guys. I know there's other people who wanted to. Well, I know some people have to actually go back. He has to go back.
I actually have it's a two-part question. The first part of the question is, the Xbox has made over the last 6 or 7 months a significant effort in marketing itself toward an older audience. And then you see Nintendo likewise marketing itself toward maybe a younger audience. Now, Lauren, Abe was a significant launch title, very important for the release of the Xbox. And Jason Crash recently, I think, was released on the Xbox. I'm wondering what kind of forces you see exerted from a company like Microsoft or maybe Nintendo as to what types of content they allow in their system. And before you answer, can I just pop in one other second question is, this speaks directly to Super Monkey Ball. Super Monkey Ball is an extremely entertaining, fun, and I'd say borderline addictive game. Yet you see absolutely nothing like it on the Xbox. I'm wondering why that is, and also if you think there is a market for a game like that on the Xbox.
Coming from the Xbox, I think that our relationship in the past with Sony was third party, so we weren't really involved, And we've never worked with Nintendo. I think Nintendo has said that they see that younger market and they see the other manufacturers missing it. And I think Microsoft is a company that's evolved out of understanding operating systems, which means on one hand, they know it's not about any specific type of content. It's really about supplying the delivery system. The history of Nintendo is very different. The history of Nintendo is one where we say we have a very specific guidelines on the type of content we're going to allow. Sony opened that up to have more freedom, and it still has its what do you call that? The last process and the Q&A process, where they knock out the things that might be too offensive or that might get your rating you don't want. that might make the brand look bad, whatever. And Microsoft, I think the reason why you're not seeing something like Super Monkey Ball on Microsoft is that no one's proposed it to them. There's an amazing phenomena that I think all of us witness, because we wind up talking about it at different times, is how much isn't happening out there. How many game designers aren't making those proposals for something that would go this way for that system or in different directions, And I know that as just in running a company and trying to recruit people. I've got job positions that I know if I could have found for myself 6 years ago, I just would have been all over. But I can't find one person in an industry that just has the balanced skill sets and the passions to really fill that role. So the publishers, it's amazing because when you really get close to the publishers, you find that with the big publishers who aren't in trouble, when they're in trouble, no one wants to spend money, right? Or they only want a $2 million budget. But when they're not in trouble, they're looking and they want a more well-rounded portfolio is what my experience of witnessing this is. And the majority of what they have being presented to them is follow the leader products, like Jason's describing.
Nagoshi-san, perhaps you can comment on working with Nintendo as well.
Xbox は、マーケットは難しいでしょうね。小さいというか、まずは。ハードの絶対的な価値っていうのがまだはっきりと出てないんで、それは大体皆さん考えている通りだと思います。
Well, I believe that you all will feel that the marketing of Xbox is difficult because that the value hasn't been fully recognized by the audience yet.
ちなみに今だから僕は任天堂と仕事をしている機会が多いんですけど、任天堂は今キャッチコピーで任天堂ディファレンスっていうのをずっと去年からやってますけども、でこれの意図を前宮本茂から直接聞いたことがあるんですよ。で任天堂は結局若い世代を中心にして、任天堂の最大の悩みっていうのを聞いたことあるんです。それは何かっていうと、最初に必ず手に入れてくれるんだけど必ず捨てられてしまうっていう悩みがあるっていうのを言われたんですよ。そして PS2 に変えてしまう。要はランドセルみたいなもんですよ。こっちにランドセルあるかどうか知らないですけど、必ずみんな手に入れる。だけど必ず中学生になったらランドセルは捨ててしまう。だからそうならないようなもっと長く愛されるカバンにしたいみたいな、そういう話を前聞いたことがあって、で任天堂がその幅広い世代を狙うかどうか、そしてそれに愛される機会にするかどうか僕もわからないですけど、とりあえず中心はコアはまずどこかっていうのがあった上で展開させていこうっていうその意欲というか、いうのは僕はすごい分かりやすい戦略だったから、Xbox にそういうなんていうのかな、フィロソフィーというかハードに対するそういうものがもっとはっきりあれば、チャンスあると思うんですけど、今のところ僕も見ててコアユーザーは好きそうだけどその先っていうのはちょっとまだ分からないです。
I've been working with Nintendo very frequently, and recently that Nintendo presented the catchphrase, which is Nintendo difference, and which means that I talked to Mr. Miyamoto directly, and he explained the meaning of the catchphrase, that the Nintendo is bought by everybody, but maybe when they were very young. But when they go on to become older, they just forget about the Nintendo and then they move into PlayStation. So it's really like the the children's backpack. They were very excited. Everybody buys backpack, but when they become older, they change it into more sophisticated bag. So it's a kind of a problem of they're kind of they're suffering by that fact. So they want to really enlarge the audience, extend the audience. And I'm not sure if Nintendo will ever target the older age the people. But their philosophy is very clear. They have a very the core audience, and centered on the core audience, they want to develop their the business. So their philosophy is very easy to understand, and then it's very persuasive. But I don't see such a philosophy with the Xbox yet. So if the Xbox establish some kind of a philosophy like that, probably they will have a better chance in the marketplace.
Yeah, I gave a talk at DICE about the aging of the industry, and I think it's available on www.nightydog.com. I think it's also available on the DICE website. The Academy, yeah. To summarize very simply, I was 8 years old when I started playing video games. I'm now 32, and I still play them. My parents don't play them because they weren't around when they were kids, and they never got into them. And because of that, every couple of years, we get a couple of years older, and that brings up the average age by a percentage of that. And eventually, you'll have 60-year-olds playing, because I'll be 60 and I'll still be playing. And then there will be people out there making software that is, in effect, the golden girls of video games, targeted at 60-year-olds. Every console is attempting to move up market in age, because that's where the average ager is moving. I know for a fact that Nintendo is actively seeking titles, and they went out and they actively pursued Resident Evil because that title makes them seem like they're a little bit older. I think what you see when you see a difference in where the consoles are is not so much a focus, but a history. Nintendo has some incredible game designers. Miyamoto-san is potentially one of the best, if not the best, in the industry. But his experience is in making kids' games, and that's where his interest is. And because he makes great games that sell the system, kids end up buying that system a little bit more maybe than the PlayStations. And therefore, the audience may be a little younger, which means people who are bringing software out for that system tend to target a little younger, because that's where the market is. So these things tend to drive themselves not by a directive from the companies, but more by history. The Xbox on the other end of the spectrum has a very, very large base of PC developers that have moved over to it based on the architecture. PC developers, on average, have been developing for an older age group, because if you look back at history, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds didn't have PCs. It was more 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds that had PCs around to play games. So when they went over to the Xbox, they naturally brought what they were interested in and what they did best over to the Xbox. If you proposed to Microsoft a game for children, I would guarantee that they would take it. Sony is kind of caught in the middle of this, just based on the fact that they were the first game company that kind of moved away from the Nintendo model, the Sega model, and kind of moved it up age. But at the same time, with Jak and Daxter and their young games, they have kind of a broader audience. In my knowledge, and I don't speak for Sony, even though I work for them here, I speak as a developer for Sony. I don't know of them turning away any product that isn't absolutely outrageously offensive or terribly programmed, buggy, or for some other reason bad for the system. And when I say that, what I mean is, the question was, what is Sony looking for? It's looking for submissions. If you give them a Golden Girls, they'll let you put it out. You may not sell it, but you might sell it. You might be the first company to make games for 60-year-olds, and you might have a market there. If, on the other hand, you give them something really young, I bet they'll take it. And I would guess that Nintendo and Microsoft have the same attitude, with the caveat that if it's really disgusting, really mature, it's not good for the system, they might cut it. But within the boundary of okay, within the boundary of morally acceptable, they'll take anything. You just have to carve out a niche or chase along after somebody as well, but you won't make money chasing people.
Right. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists, Jason Rubin, Nagoshi-san, and Lorne Lanning.